Charles III was crowned as monarch of the United Kingdom on 6 May 2023. It's estimated that as many as 400 million people around the world watched the ceremony on television or the web. Some were loyal supporters of the monarchy, but others just tuned in for the grand spectacle of the first coronation of a sovereign in Britain in 70 years. The pomp and pageantry, in a very real sense, was medieval. Some of the rituals, such as the placing of a crown on the new king's head, date even further back in history. Those rites testified to the long line of kings and queens that have ruled, but also to the role of the monarchy today, and not just monarchy in Britain. In pride of place at King Charles's coronation, right in the front rows in Westminster Abbey, sat other kings and queens and members of various royal families. There was the King of Spain and the King of Sweden, but also the King of Thailand, the King of Tonga, and the King of Lesotho, the Crown Prince of Morocco and the Crown Prince of Japan, even the Maori King of New Zealand and the Zulu King from South Africa. Indeed, there were royals representing more than 40 ruling dynasties from around the world, and a few from defunct dynasties as well. For the occasion, gathered here together was a veritable club of royals. Their presence showed that though the rites and rituals came from the past, monarchy in many places is a thing of the present. Like them or loathe them, the royals are still with us. In the world today, there is one emperor, around a dozen kings, and one reigning queen, and assaulted sultans, emirs, princes, and a grand duke, who reign over countries big and small. I'm Cindy McCreary, Associate Professor of History at the University of Sydney in Australia, and head of the Modern Monarchy in Global Perspective Research Hub. The Hub is an international network of scholars who do research on cultural, social, and political aspects of modern monarchy. I work particularly on the British Empire, but I'm also especially interested in monarchies in places like Hawaii and the Malay states.
And I'm Robert Aldrich, a Professor of Emeritus of History at the University of Sydney. I work on the French and British empires and have a particular interest in monarchs and colonialism in Asia. And I work with Sydney in the Research Hub. In this series of podcasts, we hope to tell you something about monarchy in the modern world. We also hope to show you why it is such an interesting topic for research and for reading and for further exploration. We want to show the fascination and significance of individual monarchs and members of royal families, but also of the institution of monarchy and the place that monarchy plays in the world.
So, Robert, to begin with, what is monarchy?
That's a good question, but not really such an easy one. The key trait of a monarch is that he or she inherits the position. Even if a monarch has come to power through war, revolution, or coup, the ruler's intention is to pass the throne on to their heirs. In short, monarchy is a hereditary form of government, but it's more than just that. Throughout history, monarchs have wielded a vast array of powers. They make laws, they dispense justice, they tax their subjects, they fight wars. Most present-day monarchs no longer have such wide powers, which have been curtailed by constitutions and elected parliamentary government. But in technical terms, most of what were absolute monarchies are now constitutional monarchies, though there are exceptions. Many monarchs still retain certain powers, however. For instance, they may have the right to summon and dismiss parliaments and governments. A number retain a certain spiritual aura or even a kind of quasi-divinity. Even the British king, after all, is head of the Church of England. And in his coronation, King Charles had to swear an oath to defend Protestantism. Monarchs have cultural power, that is soft power. Their palaces and art collections are part of a nation's heritage. They've traditionally set trends in everything from the way they dressed to the sports they played. They're celebrities, rivaled perhaps only by movie stars, singers, and athletes, in the crowds they draw and the attention they get. And monarchs stand at the center of a whole extensive network of courtiers, military personnel, artisans, and not least of all, the often large royal families. Some are worth billions of pounds, euros, reals, or baht. That is, billions of dollars. and all of them enjoy privileges not available to us mere mortals. Monarchy is one of the oldest institutions in world history. Think back to the ancient Mesopotamian kings, the old Roman emperors and the Chinese emperors. It has also been one of the most common political institutions around the globe, from the familiar dynasties of Europe, like the Tudors and the Bourbons, to the many royal dynasties of Africa, kings in Africa that Europeans often just call chiefs, but who reigned over countries sometimes larger than those in Europe and who had similar powers to the European monarchs. Around 1900, not that long ago, in most countries in the world outside the Western Hemisphere, monarchs ruled most everywhere. They were either indigenous rulers or, in the colonial period in African, Asian, and Oceanic history, they were the European monarchs who had been imposed by the colonizers. Queen Victoria, for example, was named Empress of India in 1876. The Emperor of Japan also ruled over Taiwan and Korea by 1910. And the Italian king in the 1930s briefly called himself Emperor of Ethiopia. Cindy, monarchy has had a long run, but has it always had an easy run through history?
Not at all, Robert. The history of monarchy is a history of civil war, tumult, and threat for many monarchs. If we think back to the early modern period in European history, think of King Charles I in England in 1649 and King Louis XVI in France in 1793. Both of these monarchs lost their heads. And then later, the centuries-old Romanov dynasty in Russia came to an end in revolution and massacre in 1917. And then the end of the First World War in Europe brought down numerous dynasties, including the Hohenzollerns in Germany and the Habsburgs in Austria, as well as a bit later, the Ottoman dynasty in Turkey. But at the same time, today, in around 40 countries around the world, monarchs are still on the throne. Moreover, some dynasties that no longer have thrones, like, for example, the Maharajas in India, still exert significant social and cultural influence over their populations. Now, it's true that most of the world's countries do not have monarchs, and republics are now more numerous across the globe than monarchies. Some of today's monarchs, moreover, are not universally popular. At various locations around the United Kingdom, and indeed around the world, during the televised spectacle of King Charles's coronation, some banners read, "Not our king," or "Republic." Most of Britain's former colonies, over which Queen Victoria had reigned, are now republics. But King Charles still reigns over 14 of them, including Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. But some of these are falling away. Barbados became a republic in 2021, Jamaica plans to follow suit, and in Australia, the Labor government has foreshadowed a referendum on the republic in a few years' time. It needs to be remembered, however, that there was a referendum on becoming a republic in Australia in 1999, and that referendum failed, so it's unclear what a future referendum would bring. In Spain, the region of Catalonia would like to break away and become a separate country, presumably one without a king. And criticism of monarchy has risen. For example, in Thailand, there is more criticism of the monarchy, even though critics there risk arrest and severe punishment for criticizing the monarch. Even in Japan, there is some concern about the future of the throne. The emperor must be a man, according to traditional custom, and there are almost no male heirs to the current emperor, really only his brother and one nephew. So how firm are the foundations of present-day thrones? The study of monarchy, past and present, tells us much, I think, about developments in society, and indeed, monarchy has had to evolve to accommodate changes over time. Think, for example, of the royal's private life. Down until the 20th century, this was regarded as strictly private, that is, off-limits from the media. Yet in Britain, the saga of Charles and Diana, and now of Harry and Meghan, has been played out across newspapers around the globe. Now, much of that coverage may be simply gossip and tittle-tattle, but I think it does say something about marriage and divorce, issues around race, and the desire of new generations to break away from the conventions of the past. Or think of another case, one that may not be as familiar to listeners. In Belgium, a woman named Delphine Boel for years pursued a campaign to be recognized as the biological daughter of the now former King Albert II and his mistress. For years, the king refused to have anything to do with her. Then a court ordered him to take a DNA test, which proved that he was indeed Delphine's biological father. She now has the title of Princess Delphine and is formally accepted as a member of the Belgian royal family. So perhaps that case tells us something about issues around gender, family, and human rights more broadly, as well as evolving ideas about sexuality and morality. And Robert, that's not the only scandal we're going to hear about in this podcast series, is it?
Indeed. Most royal families have skeletons in the closet, and increasingly these skeletons are being outed. The taboos about discussing royal private lives have disappeared. Scandal is one of the subjects that we will deal with in this series of podcasts because it shows some of the challenges that have affected thrones and some of the issues around monarchy, and also around changes in society. The general focus of our recordings, in fact, is on things that have destabilized thrones and weakened monarchs in modern history, weakened monarchies in modern history as well as institutions. As Shakespeare put it in his great play King Henry IV, Part 2, "Uneasy lies the head that wears a crown." What was true in Shakespeare's time is still true now. We'll see how some monarchies survived, while others perished over the past century or so. In coming podcasts, we'll talk about scandal, but also about war, revolution, colonialism and decolonization, and republicanism in places like Australia and elsewhere in the Commonwealth. We'll look at case studies ranging from Ethiopia to Indonesia, from Britain to Polynesia. We'll be interviewing some of the leading scholars of the history of monarchy, whose research has provided new perspectives on royal figures and the institution of monarchy around the world. In these podcasts, we'll meet, at least through the words of our presenters, some really fascinating figures. We'll learn about an African emperor who was kicked off his throne not just once, but twice. And we'll learn about the kings and queens from the Pacific Islands. One doesn't always think of the islands of Polynesia as having kings and queens. And we'll be introduced to an Indonesian sultan of today, a hereditary ruler who continues to reign within the Republic of Indonesia. We'll hear about sovereigns who lost thrones and monarchs who gained vast domains, only then to lose most of them through colonial expansion. We'll see the ways that thrones have been battered, how crowns have wobbled, and how whole kingdoms have disappeared. But we'll also see how in many places, as Cindy was saying, monarchy has proved capable of change, of modernization, of accommodation, and indeed of resilience. We'll see how monarchy continues to be a subject of historical interest, but for both Republicans and monarchists of present-day contention, of support and condemnation. Join us on this journey through modern history and around the world to discover monarchy, past and present.
This series of podcasts has been created by the Modern Monarchy and Global Perspective Research Hub at the University of Sydney. Please see our website for further information at global-modern-monarchy.sydney.edu.au. The texts of the podcasts were written by Associate Professor Cindy McCreary and Professor Emeritus Robert Aldrich, and the series was produced by Peter Adams from the University of Sydney School of Humanities. The podcasts are copyright by the University of Sydney, and the authors and interviewees retain rights to their material. We acknowledge the Indigenous Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which the University of Sydney stands.